The man stood at the center of power, wrapped in silk, metals, and illusion, while an entire continent burned. In the final months of the Third Reich, as Germany collapsed under relentless Allied bombing and Soviet armies closed in from the east, Hermann Göring retreated into fantasy. Once hailed as the architect of Nazi air power, once feared as the man who commanded the skies, he now drifted through palace corridors weighed down not by responsibility, but by jewels, stolen art, and narcotics. Outside, cities were being erased. Inside, Göring dined beneath chandeliers looted from the homes of murdered families. This was not how the story was supposed to end. Hermann Göring had been a war hero once. A fighter ace of the First World War. A man who stood beside Adolf Hitler at the birth of the Nazi movement. A figure who embodied spectacle, confidence, and raw ambition. To the German public, he was the smiling face of strength. Flamboyant, reassuring, larger than life. To Hitler, for many years, he was the most loyal of lieutenants. But power has a way of exposing what lies beneath the uniform. As the Reich expanded, Göring expanded with it, in authority, in greed, in arrogance. He became head of the Luftwaffe, overseer of the German war economy, and one of the principal architects of racial plunder. His signature authorized policies that stripped Jews of property, rights, and ultimately life itself. His orders enabled the machinery that carried millions toward annihilation. And yet, when the war was lost and the truth stood undeniable, Hermann Göring denied everything. At Nuremberg, he would attempt one final performance, not with bombs or aircraft, but with words. He would argue, deflect, charm, and manipulate, trying to rewrite history in real time. But the evidence was overwhelming. The mask had cracked. The empire had fallen. This is not merely the story of a Nazi leader. This is the story of how vanity became policy, how ambition turned into atrocity, and how one man helped drag a nation into moral collapse, all while believing until the very end that he was the hero. Hermann Wilhelm Göring was born on January 12, 1893, in Rosenheim, Bavaria, into a world defined by hierarchy, militarism, and imperial confidence. His father, Heinrich Ernst Göring, was a former cavalry officer and colonial administrator who served the German Empire abroad, including in Southwest Africa. This environment shaped Hermann from the very beginning. Authority was not something to be questioned, it was something to be claimed. Göring's childhood was marked by instability and contradiction. Though born into an aristocratic worldview, his family's finances were uncertain, and his upbringing lacked consistent emotional grounding. One of the most influential figures in his early life was Hermann von Eppenstein, a wealthy physician of Jewish origin who became the Göring family's patron and, controversially, his mother's lover. Eppenstein provided the family with access to castles, status, and privilege, benefits that Göring would later deny ever having received. This contradiction would define Göring's character, a man who took without gratitude, who benefited from others while rewriting the story to suit his ambition. From a young age, Göring showed signs of theatricality and dominance. He craved attention, admired uniforms, and idolized military heroes. Disciplined schools shaped him harshly, but they also reinforced his obsession with status and command. He learned early that authority could mask insecurity, and that performance could substitute for substance. When World War I erupted in 1914, Göring found his calling in the skies. He joined the German Air Service and quickly distinguished himself as a fighter pilot. Flying was not just combat, it was spectacle. It was danger, independence, and glory rolled into one. Göring thrived in this environment, earning decorations and recognition, eventually commanding the famed fighter squadron once led by Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. The war ended in defeat, but Göring refused to accept it psychologically. Like many veterans, he embraced the stab-in-the-back myth, the belief that Germany had not been defeated militarily but betrayed internally. This narrative became foundational to his worldview. Democracy was weakness. Compromise was betrayal. Only force, hierarchy, and dominance could restore greatness. In the chaos of post-war Germany, Göring drifted, wounded both physically and emotionally. He became addicted to morphine following injuries sustained during the failed Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, when he marched alongside Adolf Hitler in an attempted coup. Shot in the groin during the uprising, Göring fled into exile, carrying not only physical pain but a growing dependency that would shadow him for life. Yet the putsch also cemented his bond with Hitler. Göring was no longer just a veteran. He was a revolutionary. He had bled for the movement. When the Nazi Party rebuilt itself in the late 1920s, Göring re-emerged as one of its most valuable assets. He was charismatic, well-spoken, and socially adept, a stark contrast to many of the party's more radical figures. He knew how to charm elites, reassure conservatives, and present Nazism as respectable power rather than street violence. By the time Hitler became chancellor in 1933, Göring stood perfectly positioned to transform ambition into authority. What followed was not accidental. It was the fulfillment of a lifetime of craving recognition, control, and grandeur, a trajectory that would carry Hermann Göring from wounded pilot to one of the most powerful and destructive men in modern history. Hermann Göring did not merely serve Adolf Hitler, he understood him. In the volatile ecosystem of the Nazi leadership, where ideological fanatics, brutal enforcers, and opportunistic climbers competed for proximity to the Führer, Göring mastered something far more valuable than blind obedience. He mastered access. From the earliest days of the Nazi movement, Göring positioned himself as both soldier and statesman. He was not the party's chief theorist, nor its most violent street enforcer, but he was its most presentable face to Germany's traditional elites. Where others shouted, Göring reassured. Where others threatened, Göring negotiated. This made him indispensable. After Hitler's appointment as chancellor in January 1933, Göring moved swiftly. He understood that revolutions were not sustained by speeches alone, but by control of institutions. Within weeks, he was appointed Minister of the Interior for Prussia, Germany's largest and most influential state. This position gave him authority over the police, a power Göring immediately weaponized. Under the pretext of restoring order after the Reichstag fire, Göring oversaw the mass arrest of political opponents. Communists, Social Democrats, and liberals were swept up in waves of repression. Göring publicly declared that anyone who resisted would be shot. It was not an empty threat. The rule of law dissolved rapidly under his authority. This period marked Göring's transformation from political ally to regime architect. He was no longer merely following Hitler's vision, he was operationalizing it. The legal framework of repression, emergency decrees, protective custody, special courts, all bore his imprint. Terror was no longer chaotic. It was bureaucratized. Göring's loyalty to Hitler was real, but it was not selfless. He understood that Hitler rewarded usefulness above all else. And Göring was supremely useful. He shielded Hitler from the messy details of governance, allowing the Führer to remain above the fray while Göring absorbed both power and blame. The relationship was symbiotic. Hitler valued Göring's flamboyance, his confidence, his ability to project strength. Göring, in turn, basked in Hitler's favor, knowing it elevated him above rivals like Joseph Goebbels and Heinrich Himmler. For years, Göring was widely regarded as Hitler's designated successor. This status was formalized in 1939, when Hitler issued a decree naming Göring as his successor in the event of incapacitation. The symbolism was profound. Göring was not merely a minister, he was the Reich's second man. Yet even at the height of their partnership, cracks were visible. Göring's love of luxury, his growing arrogance, and his increasing detachment from reality occasionally irritated Hitler. But as long as Göring delivered results, crushing opposition, consolidating power, projecting strength, these flaws were tolerated. What mattered was effectiveness. And in the early years of the Third Reich, Hermann Göring was devastatingly effective. The image Hermann Göring carefully cultivated, that of a jovial, cultured statesman, concealed a far darker reality. Behind the polished uniforms and theatrical speeches stood a man who played a central role in constructing one of the most ruthless systems of repression the modern world had ever known. As Prussian Interior Minister, Göring established the Gestapo in April 1933. Though later absorbed into Heinrich Himmler's SS empire, The Gestapo was Göring's creation. Its purpose was clear: eliminate enemies of the state without restraint. Göring openly declared that he did not care about legality. His task, he said, was to annihilate opposition. The first concentration camps emerged under this framework. These were not yet the industrialized death camps of later years, but their function was unmistakable. They were places of terror designed to break bodies and spirits. Göring authorized their creation and defended their existence publicly, framing them as necessary tools for national security. Simultaneously, Göring oversaw the systematic exclusion of Jews from German public life. Long before mass extermination, there was dispossession. Jewish businesses were boycotted, seized, or forcibly transferred to Aryan ownership. Göring was not a passive observer of this process. He was its administrator. In 1938, after the violent pogrom known as Kristallnacht, Göring chaired a meeting that laid bare the regime's priorities. While synagogues smoldered and Jewish families lay shattered, Göring's primary concern was economic efficiency. He imposed massive fines on the Jewish community, not as punishment for the violence inflicted upon them, but as compensation for damages to German property. This was racial policy as profit model. Under Göring's authority, Jewish wealth was stripped on an industrial scale. Art collections, homes, businesses, and bank accounts were confiscated and redistributed. Göring personally benefited enormously. He became one of Europe's most prolific art thieves, amassing masterpieces stolen from Jewish families across occupied territories. This was not incidental corruption. It was ideological plunder, justified by racial doctrine and enabled by state power. In 1941, Göring signed one of the most damning documents of the Holocaust. He authorized Reinhard Heydrich to coordinate the final solution to the Jewish question. Though Göring later claimed ignorance of genocide, this order tied him directly to the machinery of mass murder. The transformation was complete. The war hero had become an enabler of annihilation. The charming statesman had become a bureaucrat of death. And yet, Göring never saw himself as a villain. He believed history would vindicate him. That power, once seized, would justify its own excesses. That loyalty to Hitler and the Reich excused everything. This delusion would follow him to the very end. When Hermann Göring was appointed commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, he regarded it not merely as a military branch, but as a personal kingdom. Aviation was where his legend had begun, and he intended to rebuild German air power in his own image, bold, modern, and invincible. For Göring, the Luftwaffe was proof that Germany had risen from the humiliation of Versailles, and that he himself remained indispensable to Adolf Hitler's vision. From the outset, Göring demanded absolute loyalty. Promotions were granted not solely on competence, but on devotion to him personally. He cultivated an atmosphere where dissent was mistaken for betrayal and flattery was rewarded as strategic insight. In public, he presented the Luftwaffe as a marvel of engineering and discipline. In private, it became increasingly shaped by his vanity. During the rearmament years, Göring oversaw massive expansion. Aircraft factories multiplied, pilots were trained at unprecedented speed, and the Luftwaffe became the most modern air force in Europe by the late 1930s. Göring boasted openly that no enemy bomber would ever reach German cities. His confidence was contagious and catastrophic. Early successes reinforced his arrogance. During the invasions of Poland and France, the Luftwaffe played a decisive role. Enemy air forces were destroyed on the ground, and German bombers supported fast-moving ground troops with devastating efficiency. Hitler was impressed. Göring was praised publicly and privately. His belief in his own infallibility hardened into dogma. But the Luftwaffe's structure contained fatal weaknesses. Göring prioritized offensive power over strategic sustainability. He dismissed the importance of long-range bombers, radar networks, and industrial protection. Logistics were neglected. Pilot training was shortened. Replacement systems were inadequate. These flaws were invisible in victory, but mercilessly exposed in prolonged war. The Battle of Britain marked the first true test. Göring promised Hitler that Britain could be bombed into submission. When German bombers initially targeted RAF airfields, The Luftwaffe came close to crippling Britain's air defense. But Göring, eager for spectacle and revenge after attacks on Berlin, shifted the bombing campaign towards civilian cities. It was a catastrophic decision. The RAF recovered. German losses mounted. Göring publicly blamed his commanders, privately blamed fate, and never blamed himself. The Luftwaffe failed to gain air superiority, and Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, was quietly abandoned. Despite this failure, Göring retained his titles and privileges. Hitler still believed in him, or perhaps still needed him. But trust was eroding. As the war expanded eastward, the Luftwaffe was stretched beyond its limits. In the vast skies over the Soviet Union, German aircraft faced brutal conditions, immense distances, and relentless resistance. Göring promised that the Luftwaffe could supply encircled German armies from the air. This claim would prove disastrous at Stalingrad. When the Sixth Army was surrounded in winter 1942, Göring assured Hitler that air transport could sustain them. It was a lie born of pride. The Luftwaffe lacked the aircraft, the fuel, and the conditions necessary to deliver sufficient supplies. Thousands of soldiers starved and froze as Göring's fantasy collapsed. Stalingrad was not merely a military defeat. It was a public unmasking. From that moment, Göring's authority weakened. His confidence turned hollow. His grand pronouncements rang false. The Luftwaffe, once his proudest creation, became a symbol of overreach and decay. And the worst was yet to come. As Allied power grew, the war returned home to Germany. British and American bomber fleets expanded relentlessly, operating from bases beyond Göring's reach. The skies he had sworn to defend became corridors of destruction. Entire cities were reduced to ash. And Hermann Göring, once the guardian of the Reich's airspace, could offer no protection. The first 1,000-bomber raid on Cologne in 1942 shocked the nation. Göring dismissed reports that American fighters were escorting bombers deep into German territory. He insisted it was impossible. When evidence proved otherwise, he accused subordinates of exaggeration or incompetence. Reality no longer mattered, only his pride. By 1944, the introduction of the American P-51 Mustang changed the war irreversibly. With long-range escort capability, Allied bombers could strike oil refineries, rail hubs, and aircraft factories with impunity. The Luftwaffe bled pilots it could not replace. Göring's air empire collapsed in slow motion. German civilians blamed him openly. Air raid shelters filled with bitterness. Göring's lavish lifestyle became an object of hatred. While cities burned, he retreated to palaces, estates, and hunting lodges. Hitler noticed. The Führer began excluding Göring from conferences. Decisions were made without him. His once privileged access vanished. Göring remained Reichsmarschall in title, but power had slipped away. On D-Day, the humiliation was complete. The Luftwaffe could barely contest the skies over Normandy. The Allies deployed over 11,000 aircraft. Göring could muster only a few hundred. His earlier boasts echoed as cruel mockery. As defeat loomed, Göring withdrew further into isolation, morphine addiction, and fantasy. He still believed himself Hitler's rightful successor. He still clung to the 1941 decree. But he underestimated the ruthless politics of collapse. Martin Bormann moved quietly. Himmler schemed. Göring hesitated. When Berlin was encircled and Hitler admitted defeat, Göring faced a final choice: act or be erased. That decision would seal his fate. By April 1945, the Third Reich was no longer a state. It was a collapsing illusion. Soviet artillery thundered closer to Berlin each day, while the Western Allies carved their way through the heart of Germany. Inside the Führer bunker, Adolf Hitler raged against betrayal, fate, and generals who no longer existed in any meaningful command structure. Outside, Hermann Göring waited. Göring had left Berlin on April 20th, Hitler's final birthday. The departure was symbolic, though Göring did not yet understand it. The regime was dissolving, and survival now depended not on loyalty, but on timing. Göring retreated to Obersalzberg, to the Alpine estates where he had once imagined a future as Hitler's successor. He was not wrong to believe the position was his. Since 1941, a formal decree had named Göring as Hitler's successor should the Führer lose his freedom of action. The document was clear, legal, and unquestioned. It had never been rescinded. Göring carried it with him like a talisman, proof that history itself had prepared him for this moment. But history does not reward hesitation. On April 22, Hitler publicly admitted that the war was lost. He announced his intention to remain in Berlin and commit suicide. In the same breath, he stated that Göring was in a better position to negotiate peace. The implication was unmistakable: leadership could not continue from a bunker awaiting death. Alfred Jodel's report of Hitler's breakdown reached Göring within hours. Karl Kohler flew urgently to Berchtesgaden. The message was stark. Hitler was no longer governing. The decree was now active. Göring hesitated. He feared two accusations equally: treason if he acted, dereliction of duty if he did not. But there was another fear, darker and more personal: Martin Bormann. Bormann controlled access to Hitler, controlled communications, controlled the bunker itself. If Hitler died without Göring acting, Bormann would seize power and eliminate rivals. Göring knew this. Everyone did. After conferring with Kohler and Hans Lammers, Göring made his decision. He drafted a telegram, carefully worded, respectful, submissive in tone, but legally precise. He asked Hitler for permission to assume leadership under the 1941 decree. He emphasized loyalty. He emphasized legality. He included a deadline, stating that if no response came by 10 p.m., he would assume Hitler had lost freedom of action. It was a fatal miscalculation. The telegram never reached Hitler as Göring intended. It passed through Bormann's hands. Bormann seized upon it instantly, framing it not as loyalty, but as an attempted coup. He convinced Hitler that Göring was demanding resignation or threatening overthrow. Hitler's reaction was volcanic. A reply was drafted, likely dictated by Hitler but sharpened by Bormann's malice. The 1941 decree was rescinded. Göring was accused of high treason. He was ordered to resign from all offices immediately or face execution. The man once hailed as the Iron Man of the Reich was finished in a single message. Göring complied instantly. Resistance was impossible. SS units placed him, his staff, and Hans Lammers under house arrest. Over the radio, Bormann announced Göring's resignation for health reasons. It was the final humiliation. In his last will and testament, Hitler expelled Göring from the Nazi Party entirely, denouncing him as a traitor who had attempted to seize power illegally. Karl Donitz was named successor instead. Göring's rise had ended not in battle, but in a telegram and betrayal from within. When Adolf Hitler committed suicide on April 30, 1945, the Third Reich effectively died with him. But Hermann Göring was still alive and dangerously exposed. Freed from house arrest on May 5 by a passing Luftwaffe unit, Göring did not attempt to rally resistance or flee abroad. His instincts had shifted entirely. Survival now depended on surrendering to the right enemy. He feared the Soviets above all else. Bormann had reportedly ordered Göring executed if Berlin fell. Göring understood that capture by the Red Army would mean a brutal end. His only hope lay with the Americans. On May 9th, Göring surrendered near Radstadt to elements of the U.S. Army's 36th Infantry Division. He arrived not as a fugitive, but as a man still clinging to status, wearing decorated uniforms, carrying himself as a statesman rather than a defeated criminal. The Americans were unimpressed. He was transferred to custody, interrogated by senior officers including General Karl Spatz. Göring attempted charm, authority, and intellectual dominance. He spoke fluently, confidently, often arrogantly. But the war was over. His titles meant nothing. At Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, the transformation was deliberate and systematic. Göring was stripped of privilege. His morphine addiction was addressed. He was placed on a strict diet. Over weeks, he lost 60 pounds. The once bloated Reichsmarschall became physically diminished, though mentally defiant. His intelligence was tested. An IQ of 138 confirmed what interrogators already knew: Göring was no fool. He was articulate, manipulative, and acutely aware of legal nuance. In September 1945, he was transferred to Nuremberg. The stage was set for judgment. When Hermann Göring entered the courtroom at Nuremberg in November 1945, he did not walk like a defeated man. He walked like a commander inspecting a battlefield. Though stripped of rank, uniform, and power, he believed, deeply, that this was still a contest he could win. The Palace of Justice became Göring's final stage. Among the defendants, he was the most senior, the most articulate, and the most self-assured. Others shrank into silence or confusion. Göring leaned forward, attentive, alert, constantly observing judges, prosecutors, and fellow prisoners. He smiled. He laughed. He whispered commentary to those seated beside him. To many observers, it appeared as though he were still performing leadership. Psychologically, this was no accident. Göring understood power as performance. Authority, he believed, existed where confidence dominated uncertainty. And in the early days of the trial, he attempted to seize control of the room through intellect rather than force. The charges were sweeping: conspiracy to wage aggressive war, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Millions of deaths were now condensed into legal language. Göring listened carefully, occasionally shaking his head, as though amused by the audacity of history judging him. When asked to enter a plea, Göring attempted to deliver a long speech. He was abruptly stopped. Forced to choose between guilty or not guilty, he replied coldly, not guilty in the sense of the indictment. It was a calculated answer. Over the following months, Göring's strategy became clear. He would accept responsibility for political decisions, but deny criminal intent. He would frame himself as a statesman, a soldier, a patriot. He would acknowledge harsh measures, but insist they were necessities of war. And above all, he would separate himself from the Holocaust, shifting blame toward Heinrich Himmler and the SS. He was persuasive, remorselessly so. During testimony, Göring spoke with confidence bordering on arrogance. He explained the structure of the Reich, the economic pressures, the paranoia of encirclement. He framed anti-Semitic policies as bureaucratic measures, stripped of murderous consequence. He claimed ignorance where evidence suggested knowledge, and necessity where documents revealed intent. But the prosecution had prepared meticulously. Robert H. Jackson, the chief American prosecutor, understood Göring's danger. This was not a broken man. This was a charismatic architect of destruction, capable of manipulating perception even after defeat. Jackson dismantled Göring patiently. He read minutes from meetings Göring himself had chaired, meetings following Kristallnacht, where Göring discussed the seizure of Jewish property and the financial punishment of Jewish communities. He introduced documents bearing Göring's signature ordering Reinhard Heydrich to organize the final solution. Each page eroded Göring's constructed narrative. Then came the films. Footage from concentration camps, corpses stacked like debris, survivors hollow-eyed, skeletal, silent. The courtroom froze. Even Göring could not maintain composure. He claimed the films were exaggerated, possibly staged. Yet witnesses testified. Survivors spoke. Numbers became faces. When cross-examined about murdered Allied airmen, Göring offered evasions. When questioned about Hungarian Jews deported to Auschwitz, he claimed ignorance. But evidence contradicted him repeatedly. Still he fought. He challenged witnesses. He corrected prosecutors on dates, titles, and procedural details. He attempted to dominate exchanges, sometimes successfully. 4 moments at a time, Göring almost appeared victorious. But history was not on trial. He was not on September 30, 1946. The courtroom reconvened for judgment. Hermann Göring sat rigid, expression controlled, posture deliberate. He had performed brilliantly. He knew it. But brilliance could not erase consequence. The verdict was devastating. Göring was found guilty on all 4 counts. The judgment described him as second only to Hitler in responsibility for the regime's crimes. Not a follower. Not a subordinate. A driving force. The words were final, unambiguous, merciless. There is nothing to be said in mitigation. The sentence was death by hanging. For Göring, this was unacceptable, not the death itself, but the manner, He petitioned the court to be shot as a soldier rather than hanged as a criminal. The request was denied. The symbolism mattered. Hanging was not execution, it was judgment. In the days that followed, Göring appeared calm. Too calm. He wrote letters. He joked with guards. He ate normally. American officers later remarked that he seemed almost relieved, as though the outcome had clarified something unresolved. But Göring would not surrender control. Somehow, through corruption, negligence, or manipulation, he obtained a cyanide capsule. How it reached him remains disputed. What matters is that Göring had planned this moment carefully. On the night before his execution, Hermann Göring swallowed the capsule. Death was instantaneous. When guards found his body, they discovered that even in death, Göring had denied his enemies their final authority. He would not hang. He would not perform repentance. He would not beg. His corpse was displayed briefly, then cremated. His ashes were scattered into the Isar River. No grave, no monument, no legacy preserved in stone. The Iron Man of the Reich ended as dust in moving water. Hermann Göring did not leave behind a battlefield legacy. He left behind rooms filled with stolen art, rooms heavy with velvet curtains, rooms echoing with laughter while Europe burned. If Adolf Hitler embodied ideological fanaticism, Göring embodied something equally destructive: corruption elevated to state policy. From the earliest days of Nazi rule, Göring fused power with personal enrichment. His control of the four-year plan gave him dominion over Germany's economy, its resources, and its industries. Under the language of national necessity, Göring built an empire of theft. Jewish property was registered, confiscated, redistributed, or sold under duress. Göring took what he wanted directly. What he did not seize, he taxed, extorted, or accepted bribes to release. Art became his obsession. As Europe fell under German occupation, Göring turned cultural annihilation into a personal hobby. He visited plunder depots like a connoisseur browsing galleries. Paintings looted from Jewish families, museums, and private collections were selected by Göring's own hand. Entire train cars were sent to his estates. Karen Hall became a monument to theft, its walls adorned with stolen masterpieces, its halls celebrating conquest through possession. This was not incidental corruption. It was ideological. Göring believed conquest entitled ownership. He believed power justified indulgence. He believed culture itself could be conquered like territory. And he was never discreet about it. His extravagance was theatrical: lavish uniforms, jeweled batons, operatic birthday celebrations, pet lions roaming his estates. Excess was not a side effect of his power. It was the point. Yet even amid indulgence, Göring remained deeply embedded in the machinery of genocide. Though less ideologically anti-Semitic than Himmler or Goebbels, Göring was indispensable to the Holocaust's execution. His signature ordered Reinhard Heydrich to organize the final solution. His ministries coordinated Aryanization. His Luftwaffe security units participated in anti-partisan operations that slaughtered civilians and Jews alike. His meetings calculated fines, deportations, and economic extermination. At Nuremberg, Göring claimed ignorance. History rejected the claim. Documents, testimony, and Göring's own words revealed a man who may not have designed the gas chambers, but ensured the system functioned. Without Göring's economic authority, logistical reach, and political dominance, genocide would not have proceeded with such speed or scale. In the end, Göring was neither madman nor monster in the mythical sense. He was something more unsettling: intelligent, charming, cultured, and willing to destroy millions for comfort, prestige, and control. He joked about his weight. He laughed at crude humor. He cried when honored. And he signed orders that erased families, cultures, and futures. That contradiction is his true legacy. Hermann Göring once stood at the center of power, draped in medals, adored by crowds, convinced history would remember him as a hero of the German nation. He imagined statues. He imagined admiration. He imagined immortality. Instead, history remembers him as a warning. Göring's life reveals how easily intelligence can serve evil, how charisma can excuse atrocity, and how power, unchecked by conscience, inevitably collapses under its own excess. He did not fall because he was betrayed. He fell because the system he helped build devoured itself. The Third Reich promised order, pride, and destiny. What it delivered was destruction, grief, and moral ruin. Göring was not an exception within that system. He was its perfect product. His end, alone, imprisoned, choosing suicide over judgment, mirrored the emptiness of the world he created. No loyal followers. No rescue. No legacy preserved. Only ashes scattered into a river, dissolving without ceremony. And yet, the consequences of his actions did not dissolve. They live on in the millions of lives erased, in families broken across generations, in stolen art still being returned decades later, in memories passed down through silence and grief. Göring's story is not confined to history books. It is embedded in the modern world, in borders redrawn, in traumas inherited, in the enduring responsibility to remember. If you are watching this today, you are part of that memory. Where are you watching from? Does your country, or your family, carry scars from the war Göring helped unleash? Did a relative fight, suffer, disappear, or survive under the shadow of the regime he served? Share your thoughts, your history, and your reflections in the comments. Because remembering is not about the past alone. It is about ensuring that power, arrogance, and cruelty never again disguise themselves as destiny. The story ends here. The lesson must not.